Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. How are you holding up? It's still crazy town where we live, and if it's offensive to use the word crazy, forgive me. I don't even have a word for how upside down the world is right now. But let's get on to talking about this episode. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I get so much feedback from people wanting to hear about narcissism, narcissistic relationships, what it's like to deal with emotionally immature adults. This episode is with Amy Marlow-MaCoy, and she specializes in working with people that have toxic relationships, and she runs some great groups, and she has an amazing book that I'm going to tell you about. But in this episode, we talk a lot about gaslighting, how to spot gaslighting, what are common phrases that are used by gaslighters, why is gaslighting so effective, and how it undermines the self-confidence of the individual, and how the HSP often feels like they're doing something wrong. They feel like they're the one to blame, which is exactly what the gaslighter wants you to feel. And then we talk about how you can begin to heal, developing self-compassion, assertiveness, embracing your sensitivity rather than having your sensitivity being seen as a flaw. Amy has a book, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it when I read you her bio. After we finish the recording, what Amy didn't get a chance to say is there are 7 chapters in her book, and each chapter has 15 to 20 exercises for each topic that really help people to dig deep into the traits and what I feel like I'm tripping over my words. They're exercises to help you do your healing work. In this episode, we also talk about codependency, love bombing, hoovering, the gray rock technique, extinction bursts, and my term is euphoric recall, and she calls it revisionist history. I think it's an episode that you're really going to enjoy. Let me tell you a little bit about Amy. Amy Marlow-MaCoy is a licensed professional counselor located in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. Amy specializes in treating adults from narcissistic, emotionally immature, or toxic relationships. Amy recently published the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook, a book designed to help readers identify gaslighting in relationships, protect themselves from further abuse, and begin to heal. In sessions and in writing, Amy uses warmth, compassion, and a geeky sense of humor to support her clients in healing. I really enjoyed this episode, and when we got off the call, Amy was saying that she really wished that we would have spent a little bit more time talking about how the healing process works and talking about internal family systems, EMDR, working with your inner child. Our plan is to record a follow-up episode. It may not come out for a few weeks, but if you like this episode, keep your eyes out for part 2 of this, where we will focus more on the healing work. If you have not taken the survey that I have on my website, you can really help me out. It will help me get to know you a little bit better. It will help me create more episodes that might be more in line with what you're interested in. And eventually my plan is to get some sponsors and to monetize the podcast, because up until now, for almost 2 years, everything is coming out of my pocket, and it's time to get some money. Having information about you, the listener, if you have kids, what your relationship status is, what you do, what your interests are, will give me more information for sponsors. If you are open to filling out the survey, it's 100% confidential. It's anonymous. You fill out whatever you want. I will not be collecting any information on you. I will not be spamming you. You can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. You can either go to the contact me page and slide down, and there's a button for the survey, or there's actually a tab right now that says survey, and you can go right there and take the survey. It says it's 17 pages. That's only because we have a separate page for children, and we assume that but we have a space for up to 8 children. So if we just had it for 1 or 2 kids, the survey would be much shorter. So if you can do that and help me out, I'd really appreciate it. And now, on to the show. Hey, Amy, welcome.
Hi, Patricia. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'll tell you, I have a closed Facebook group and we've had more posts about narcissism recently. So I'm really excited to talk to you. Let me ask you first, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do. Yes, absolutely.
And when did you find out you were an HSP?
Oh, I think it was about 10 years ago, actually. While I was in supervision for my license supervisor introduced me to the concept. And as soon as I read the checklist in the front of Elaine's book, I was like, oh, yes, this is me, 100%.
Wow, that's great. I only found out a couple of years ago and I can't even remember how I found out. I feel like that's the story of my life. Like, not like this is when it happened. Like, I don't know. I just found out. Is there another term that you wished were used, or what do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I like the term. I do wish that society had a little bit of a different perception of sensitivity because it does tend to be used as a negative or to gaslight people. So I wouldn't mind if society's definition was different, but I happen to like the word. I think it's an accurate description.
All right. Everybody's heard what I think, so just listen to all the previous podcast episodes. I'll save you all the time. Let's get down to our conversation. Where is a good place to start? I have a million questions for you, but do you have a good starting place?
I'll say that in my practice, I really focus on supporting adults who have experienced emotionally immature or toxic or narcissistic relationships. And probably 97.75% of those clients are also HSPs. So this conversation that we're going to have today is one that I have like on the daily with my clients. And I just wanted to start out by saying you are not crazy. You've probably been made to feel like you are, but you're not.
And it's not your fault.
Exactly. Yes. Sensitivity is just that inborn trait that we have. And just because somebody else doesn't understand it or doesn't appreciate it or uses it against you doesn't mean you're doing something wrong.
How does somebody know? Let's take, I don't know, is it easier to break it down by relationship? I was going to ask you if somebody's in a romantic relationship with a partner, and I'm going to try and be mindful about my bias of using gendered language. I'm really practicing. So if you catch it, please feel free to correct me. I'm really working on this. So if somebody has a partner and there's some narcissistic tendencies, what would the HSP be hearing or experiencing? Because what I hear is the HSP feels like it's their fault. They feel like they're emotional and reactive because this is what's being reflected back to them. And they think that they're the one that has the problem. So is this a good place to start?
Sure. Yeah. Gaslighting can show up in any kind of relationship, romantic, friendships, family, work, even like relationships between organizations and larger societies. When it comes to romantic relationships, a lot of times one of the most common phrases that I hear showing up as gaslighting for HSPs is you are being too sensitive or you're reading too much into that. It wasn't that deep. And we know that for HSPs, everything is deep. We're deep processors. We read between the lines and we see the multiple layers of messages that are there. And so it can be really invalidating when a partner says, no, that's not what I was saying. You made that up or you went too far with it. That's not where it was going.
So can we take a step back? Because I think that these are also things that non-narcissists say. So I'm imagining somebody listening and they go like, I've heard this before. You're a narcissist. You're a narcissist. You're a narcissist. You're a narcissist.
They're everywhere.
I kind of prefer that you get a car and you get a car and you get a car.
Yep.
Can we take a minute to differentiate? Because some of these things I think people just say because they just don't get what it's like to be wired with a finely tuned nervous system. And we are going to be focusing on people with either narcissistic tendencies or narcissists. But how can if somebody's already thinking, oh my gosh, everybody I know is a narcissist because I've been told that before, how can we differentiate?
So I think it's important to note that people can gaslight without nefarious intent. And sometimes it's that people really didn't know they were sending multiple layers of messages. It wasn't really their intention, or they're trying to sort of course correct after the fact. It's not always that they're setting out to intentionally and knowingly manipulate. There are people out there who are absolutely narcissistic and will intentionally manipulate and try to control your perception. But I like to remind my clients that narcissism exists on a spectrum. We all have some level of narcissistic traits, and we all need a little bit of self-involvement. You have to have some amount of ego, because that's part of what helps us take care of ourselves, is valuing ourselves. Narcissism is one that is taken to a problematic degree, where it just goes way too far on the other end. So you could have a little bit of narcissistic traits and maybe be a bit more vain or a bit more self-absorbed than the average person. That doesn't mean you're necessarily a full-blown narcissist. It could just mean that you need to pay a little more attention to your interactions with people to be more thoughtful than comes naturally to you. And sometimes people just don't notice that what they're saying is rude or insensitive or thoughtless, because for them, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And they don't quite have the empathy to put themselves in your shoes.
And where does empathy come into play with this?
Well, I would say for the HSP, it can be really challenging, because sometimes we forget that other people don't have the same depth of empathy that we do, that other people don't pick up as many nuances and subtleties as we do, and that other people aren't as aware of the vibes in the room as we are. So it can be easy to assume that someone is saying or doing something because they know it'll hurt us. And it may be that they're simply not aware we would even think about it that way.
And then what's the level of empathy that somebody that is narcissistic, where's their level of empathy?
What empathy? In the case of a true full-blown narcissist, that's one of the defining characteristics, is that they really lack the ability to put themselves in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
They really cannot understand what it's like to be anybody but themselves, and they can't look beyond their own self-interest.
Yeah. And then that usually gets turned into, poor me, I'm the victim, and you're the one that's causing me all the suffering.
Yes, there's a remarkable level of mental gymnastics that allows them to, like behind the scenes of their own brain, take whatever is happening, twist and distort it so that it's someone else doing it to them, and they are never in the wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had somebody in one of my groups ask if an HSP could be a narcissist. You know, I don't know if the question was, is it on a continuum? But I've seen that a couple times about, are narcissist HSPs gone wrong? What are your thoughts about that?
So I have not read any specific literature on this, but my personal kind of pet theory is that I think it's entirely possible that some people with what we used to call axis 2 traits, like borderline, histrionic, or narcissistic, might be people who started out with a higher level of sensitivity and grew up in just a horrific environment that did not support it, or that actively worked against developing all the wonderful things that come with being an HSP. So attachment wounds, feeling like they were not loved, feeling like they couldn't develop a sense of self that would be supported. I think it's entirely possible that there is some crossover in HSPs with a particular type of trauma or attachment wounding that then develop the narcissistic traits. But again, it's so nuanced. And I would say some narcissists, I think, do have high sensitivity and some don't.
Interesting. And the point that I always like to go back to is the trait of being an HSP is just a trait. But then when we overlay what you're talking about, the wounding, the attachment injuries, all of those things, and that gets paired with the trait of being an HSP, and people go, I hate my sensitivity, I hate my reactivity. It's not the trait of being an HSP, it's the wounding and all of these other things that get overlaid onto it. And and what I often find the healing is teasing that out, doing the healing around the wounding, so that then we can get down to the trait. And it comes with some challenges for sure. But I don't know about you. I love being an HSP. I think it comes with so many gifts. And as we're able to really, for me, the more I've done my own growth and healing and have created a lifestyle that really honors who I am, I just feel like I'm thriving. How about you?
I agree 100%. I think being an HSP and being in any sort of narcissistic or toxic relationship is a really perfect example of the way that nature and nurture work together. Like, we're born with the traits, we're born with the increased sensitivity on the neurological level. And if we're raised in, or we spend a lot of time in relationships that don't nurture that invalidate it, or make us feel like we are defective for having it, The reactivity that we experience is not just because we feel things deeply, it's because we're also taught to view that as such a bad thing.
Right. This is a great way to lead into the gaslighting, because one of the things that I see often with clients, and I'm thinking more in terms of, it happens with bosses too, but let's just go back to emotional relationships, romantic relationships, that the HSP has a thought or feeling. They tell it to their partner gaslights them. And I'll have you give some examples of gaslighting. The HSP doesn't feel seen and heard, and it feels invalidated. And so they have to turn up the volume. And then they're told that they're being reactive, emotional, and then they feel like they're the one that has the problem. So can you talk a little bit about that dynamic and some of the specific things that the partner who, I'm not going to define whether they're a narcissist or they've got narcissistic tendencies, but what things that the partner might say?
Yeah. You might hear some rustling. I'm actually going to open up my workbook where I have like a million Post-it notes to tab the sections that I wanted to refer to. But one thing I have here is a list of common phrases that gaslighters use. And some of these I think might sound familiar for your listeners. And again, these are not always specific to a romantic relationship, but I think you'll have noticed a lot of these if you've been in a romantic relationship with someone who gaslights. One of the most common, like I said in the beginning, was the "you're too sensitive" or "you're taking too much from this." Sometimes you'll also hear things like "you sound crazy." And then if you react to that and say, "What do you mean? I'm not crazy. I have a legitimate feeling. I have a right to feel the way I feel. You can't tell me not to feel this way." Then the gaslighter can come back and say, "Well, I didn't say you were crazy. I said you sounded crazy. Now you sound even more crazy. You are really overreacting to this." It can turn into this nasty loop.
Yeah, I'm thinking at which point the HSP is really losing it because you don't understand. And then I know for me that under pressure, especially if my intentions are running high, I often get very flustered.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And generally the partner, I'm just going to say the narcissist is the one that stays very calm. And so they love when they can push your buttons, and the more emotional and out of control you get, the more they have that sense of mastery.
Right, because your heightened emotions feed into what they want you to believe about yourself, which is that you're overreacting. Because look how calm they are. They're trying to have a rational conversation with you, and you're getting all emotional.
Right, right.
And there's a complete lack of acknowledgement that what they're doing is poking the sore spots.
Right.
And of course, you're going to react to someone poking a sore spot.
Can we do a little bit of a shift if this were a boss or an employer-employee relationship, or maybe a supervisor? What are some of the things? What would that look like?
In the workplace, you might see something like, say you have a face-to-face meeting and your boss tells you, "Okay, this is what I want you to do." So you go and you do what they want you to do, and you come back and say, "Okay, I completed the project." And they look at you like you have two heads, and they're like, "That's not what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to do this over here. Why did you do it that way?" And you're going like, "I know that's what we said. I know that's what we decided, and that's what they told me to do." And then they're just saying like, "You were wrong. That's not what I wanted. Now you need to redo it."
Yeah.
Or, "Why couldn't you understand like Susie down the hall? She got it.
Right.
Why couldn't you figure that out?"
And even in more extreme forms, there's blaming, there's, you're stealing from me, you're taking my ideas, you're preventing me from getting my emails, you've changed the passwords. I mean, just crazy making stuff that happens.
Yes, absolutely.
Can we take a step back and talk about why is it that HSPs and narcissists tend to end up in relationships, and what's the process that happens there?
Oh, good old codependency. So narcissists and HSPs are like peanut butter and jelly, if those things could make you sick together. HSPs, because we are intuitive, because we feel deeply, because we're really aware of the emotional waves that someone's experiencing, we're often drawn to people when we can feel that they have pain. There's a part of us that wants to help them, that wants them to feel good, that wants to make things better for them. And sometimes we're aware of the pain that the narcissist works very hard to hide, or that they work very hard to cover up with a nice, charming false front. And to be honest, many narcissists can be extremely charming and charismatic. They can really pull you in and make you feel like you are the most special person in the world. You are the only one who's ever gotten them. You're the only one that can make them feel good. And, HSPs, we're as vulnerable to manipulation as anyone. We want to believe that we are helping. We want to make the world feel better. And so we get drawn in by this idea that we are helping them to heal in a way that nobody else has, or that we understand them, and that we have this wonderful, deep connection. And then the narcissist turns around, and the second you do something they don't like, it's, but you've betrayed me, or you failed. I thought we had this special thing. And oftentimes that can trigger the HSP to feel like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? I need to fix it. And then, a lot of us HSPs are overachievers. So we will try to overachieve within a relationship where there's actually no chance of succeeding, but we don't know that right off the bat.
Yeah.
So we keep trying and trying and trying.
Isn't there usually love bombing in the beginning that initially
yes,
the HSP may not even have a clue that they're involved with a narcissist because of the love bombing? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So love bombing is like what I was saying before about, oh, you're the only one who's ever gotten me. You're so special. You're so wonderful. Where they just shower you with attention, make you feel like, a king or queen, like you are just the most important person in their world. And they'll often use hyperbole, like you're the best person they've ever known, or you're the most special, you're the sweetest, you're the kindest, the most compassionate, the most intelligent, the most articulate, whatever. Like they figure out what it is you want to hear, the traits that you value about yourself, and they lay it on thick and just pour the praise on. And that makes you feel like you have this really special, deep connection with them. And like you're soulmates, you really get each other on such a deep level. And it can make it incredibly devastating when the love bombing ends and, the criticism starts up or the withdrawal of affection.
And I think that part where the narcissist talks about how wounded they are and that you're the only one, because I think that's where that hook is. And, And I have an issue with a lot of the Disney movies because like Beauty and the Beast, where, you can just love the beast out of somebody. And I think that many people are very susceptible to this belief. And if you look at the Little Mermaid, like, give up your tongue, give up, you'll get legs, like give up a part of you and you can heal somebody else. And we don't really get that message that everybody's responsible for their own healing. And I think HSPs are particularly attuned, like you said, to wanting to give and heal and to help people get better. It's also where we get a sense of connection. It's often at our own sacrifice and that false belief that my love, this is my first marriage, my love will heal you.
Yeah.
I'm on marriage number 2 and we just had our 23rd wedding anniversary. So how do you think that first marriage worked?
Well, congratulations on the 23 years the second time around.
I honestly had no idea when I met my current husband that relationships did not have to be as hard as they were. It was just such a tumultuous marriage with extreme ups and downs, and my own. I was a part of that. When I met my current husband, like, oh my gosh, relationships are work, but this that was a 10 and this is like a 2. I really had no idea. So yeah. Where's a good place to go from here?
Let's see. I'm curious if you've ever heard any of this show up in your group. Have you ever had any of your clients or your group members say things like, my partner says they're only hard on me because they love me, or they're trying to help me fix this problem? Do your people ever hear that? Or I'm doing this for your own good. It's for your benefit.
It feels like either people are really embroiled with a narcissist or not. I don't see a lot of the middle ground. And I think I need things in context. I think my brain is kind of going like, I don't know. But I feel like that's the wrong answer. So I'm trying to talk around it.
Look, we all have quarantine brain. I got no judgment.
Why don't you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So this is one of the cases that I think can be really confusing when you are experiencing gaslighting. Because sometimes, and again, this could kind of go either way. It could be intentional or unintentional. Someone who is gaslighting you may say, well, I'm doing this to help you. I'm trying to help you be less sensitive or less reactive. I'm trying to help you fix this personal problem or this character flaw by bringing attention to it and by harping on it or by pushing you to change it. And when the gaslighting is unintentional, it might be coming from a place where the person truly believes they are helping in some way. Mm-hmm. And they don't really understand that what they're doing is invalidating and hurtful. And when it comes from someone who is invested in controlling your narrative about yourself, that's when it's like, no, I'm going to make you believe that this neutral inborn trait that has a lot of capacity to be amazing is actually a flaw that you need to fix, that it's what's causing all the problems in our relationship. And it's a way of putting off any responsibility for their own piece of the pie.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a particular client, and so I'm trying to think of a way. Is there a way to conceptualize what it would look like for somebody who's in a relationship? It's been very tumultuous. The relationship ends. The HSP feels like it's their fault. Maybe now they're starting to see signs that their partner was a narcissist, but they're not really sure. So how would somebody go about assessing if they're currently in a relationship with someone who's a narcissist or has narcissistic tendencies or not? What would they look for?
So I think you would want to look for things like, are you always the one who's apologizing? Is it always your fault that you were too sensitive, or you said something that upset them, or you knew they were going to react this way and you did this thing anyway, or you didn't read their mind? Is it always coming back to things that you did wrong? Because people who are high in narcissistic traits generally really have a hard time accepting any responsibility for their own issues or their own behaviors that are problematic. So they will shift everything onto the other person. It's always the other person's fault. So if you notice you are always saying, oh, I'm sorry, I did it again, that's a good indication that you should probably look a little more closely at what's going on.
But isn't there a place where after a fight, when there's a little bit of remorse, that the narcissist does this thing that makes you think that they care and that they're sorry? They don't really take responsibility. I'm not, are you able to language it? Because I'm not, because I think that there is this part that it's almost like the domestic abuse cycle where there's the tension up, the build up, the blow up, and then the remorse. And then all of a sudden there's a little bit of love bombing. I'm so sorry. You're the only one that gets me, the love bombing. And then it starts again, which is crazy making for the HSP. Yeah. Can you put some language to what that might look like when the narcissist is trying to pull the HSP back in?
Yes, there is actually a term for that. We call it hoovering.
Okay.
So, like the old vacuums, the idea is that, when there's a rupture in a relationship, that's sometimes the point where the HSP might kind of shake their head, look around and go like, wait a minute, what is going on here? What am I in? Why does this keep happening? And that might be the point where they would consider, is this a relationship I want to continue? And the narcissist, recognizing the risk of losing that person, losing their admiration and their caretaking, will try to suck them back in with promises that they're going to do better, or with showering them with gifts again, or going above and beyond to recreate some of the love bombing from the beginning of the relationship to show like, no, they're really a good person. They just had a bad day, or they were just upset. And this is how they really feel about you. They really love you so much. So you should stay and forgive them whatever they did or said when they were angry. So yes, that happens.
Yeah. And with our high levels of empathy, I think that can often work against us because again, I think even an HSP who had a solid childhood or has done a lot of their recovery, I think that we still have that pull for the underdog, for, the sick animal. And so I don't think it's like, well, I've done all my recovery, so I'm not going to get pulled in. I think that we tend to be much more susceptible to somebody's vulnerability and apologies and wanting to do better. I think that then the next thing is then you watch their behavior incredibly closely and see if they actually do what they say.
Right.
How does this show up around the HSP asking their partner to go to therapy or to do their own work? What do you usually see around this?
I often see the HSP show up for therapy thinking they're the one with the problem. And if they're in a relationship with a narcissist, whether that's a family relationship, a friend relationship, a romantic relationship, oftentimes it'll be just the HSP who shows up because the narcissist really doesn't think that they have anything that they need to address. If they do show up, say in couples counseling, if it's a partnership, very often the HSP will wind up feeling even crazier on the couch because their narcissist puts up a really good show of being, so understanding and so willing to help and to be supportive. And how it's really, they're just trying to keep up with the HSP's moods. And, everything they do is wrong, or they're told they're gaslighting. And then the HSP is sitting there feeling like, but that's not how this happens. That's not what it looks like. And it's, your word against their word.
How often have you had clients come to you and a previous therapist has colluded with the narcissist and the therapist thinks that the HSP is just being too sensitive because the narcissist is able to present and the therapist is not familiar with the trait? Because we know that HSPs often get misdiagnosed and pathologized with borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder or ADHD or OCD or depression or anxiety.
Yeah.
What's your experience been around that?
Well, I don't have exact numbers, but I would certainly say I've seen that come up pretty regularly. And that's one of the reasons, really, that clients tend to seek me out is that I specialize in supporting adults who've experienced narcissistic abuse. And because so many therapists don't understand what narcissism really is and how nuanced and detailed and like how deep the roots go in a relationship, if you don't know what you're dealing with, you could do a lot of harm. And I think the same thing applies with HSPs. If you don't understand the trait, you don't understand how it works and how it shows up in someone's life, you can wildly misunderstand it, mislabel it, and that can be incredibly damaging and invalidating for someone who has the trait. So yes, I definitely see that.
Yeah, I've had clients and therapists come to me that have had some damage done by other therapists. I mean, we all do the best that we can. And I just spoke on another episode of taking on a client who was an HSP, but also was non-binary. And it became very evident that the issues that were coming up tended to be more on the non-binary side. And because that's not my area of expertise, there were lots of microaggressions. I mean, I would catch it, the client would catch it, we processed it, and the client decided that they needed to find somebody that really understood their life experience, and I can't. So I want to be very clear that we all have our shortcomings, and I'm not saying that I'm above anything else. And I do have clients and therapists that come to me that have been injured because when people don't know about the trait, we can just be pathologized and misdiagnosed. And the therapist tries to get us to be like the other 80%. And that can be incredibly damaging. And we don't know. We just assume everybody else knows and we're just too emotional.
Right. Yes. Yes. On so many levels. I think the intentions are good, genuinely good. I think most therapists come into this really wanting to help. Again, if you don't understand the traits on either side, whether it's narcissistic traits or HSP traits, you don't know what it is you're looking at. So with the best of intentions, you can do a lot of harm.
Yeah.
And I think that's just one of the many reasons that it really pays to know yourself very well as a therapist, know what your strengths are, and know when you need to refer out so that you don't cause further damage, even though you're trying to help.
Yeah. And for HSPs to really know about their trait and to advocate. And if they're looking for therapy or coaching, to really ask if the coach or the therapist knows about the trait and to ask them to really demonstrate that they get it. Because again, like I thought with this client, really had the issues remained on being an HSP, we may have been able to navigate the relationship very effectively. But when it became clear that the scope really was out of my area of expertise, it was really doing the client more harm than good. And fortunately, we were able to talk about that. But yeah. So why is gaslighting so effective? How is it that it undermines the self-confidence of the HSP?
So I would say most HSPs are really prone to questioning ourselves. Because we're such a minority in the overall population, and some people may be like a double or triple minority if you're also a sexual minority, a racial minority, there's a lot of you don't fit in with everybody else. You don't see the world the same way. You don't process it the same way. And so there can be a lot of like, well, what's wrong with me? If everybody else can handle this and I'm the only one having a meltdown over it, it's got to be something wrong with me, right? So I think we're already prone to that. And even when we do our own work around that and do our work around developing self-confidence, sometimes there's a little bit of like a thin spot in our muscles around taking care of ourselves and believing in ourselves. We can have a little bit of a weak spot that can be easily exploited by someone who knows how to find weak spots. And narcissists are nothing if not experts at finding our weak spots. So if we're already prone to thinking like we might be wrong or we're probably seeing this wrong because we see it differently, that's an easy chink easy chink in the armor for a narcissist to start, working their way in.
Mm-hmm. How does somebody who's in a relationship, maybe they just like, I think back to my first marriage, it was just hard. It was volatile. It just was really hard. I'm not so sure that there were any narcissistic tendencies, but how do you know if you're in a relationship if, this is just stuff that everybody goes through, or does my partner have narcissistic tendencies? I mean, how would somebody even go about that if they're having a tumultuous relationship?
Yeah, well, I think to some extent it kind of comes back to looking at what's the balance. So if 90% of the time it's your fault, you're always having to apologize, you always misread someone, you always took it the wrong way, then you're probably being gaslit significantly because relationships generally are not 90-10. Both people play a part in whatever happens. And so if you're always having to apologize, you're always the one to blame, or you're always having to prop up the other person and you're never getting anything back or rarely getting anything back, or what you do get back is just supporting and reinforcing that role as a caretaker, that's probably a good indication that you're dealing with a pretty lopsided relationship. So some of the traits that we think of as being narcissistic, like vanity or self-absorption, those can be narcissistic traits. But also things like if the other person completely lacks empathy or they can never seem to understand your side of things, if they are unable to accept responsibility for doing anything wrong or admit to any flaws, if they are, really fixated on appearance and looking good or being around people who make them look good, and they tend to discard anyone who doesn't make them look and feel good. If they're focused on status overall, they have to look important and powerful. If they can't handle disagreement without putting the other person down or insulting them or demeaning them in some way, those are all traits that we see show up a lot with someone who has a lot of narcissism in them.
If you and I are in a relationship and I'm the HSP and you're not a narcissist, and I'm telling you, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, you're spending too much time working, we were supposed to have dinner every night, you come home late, I make dinner, you're not here. If you are not a narcissist, what are some things that you might say that would indicate that we have a healthy relationship?
So I think a healthy response to someone saying, I'm not feeling seen or heard or appreciated would be, oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I did not think about it that way. I now understand a little bit better, what it's like for you when you're waiting for me to come home and I'm late. I want to make it up to you. What can we do that will repair this? What can we do that will make you feel more appreciated? I mean, it might be that you say, I'm going to leave work at 5:00 on Friday without question. Nothing is going to stop me. And I will meet you for dinner at 5:30.
And then you watch their behavior.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. The talking without action is useless. It's the action that tells you whether someone's really on board with at least trying to make the changes.
My eyes started to tear up when you were owning your behavior. Mm-hmm. And I often, with clients who reach out to me and I validate what they're saying, that they'll say that they get teary-eyed, and there's something that when I'm struggling and I'll reach out to a friend and they just reflect what I'm experiencing, I often tear up because I think that we've had very many well-intentioned people in our life that are not really able to go, you're right, I am so sorry. That sounds like that's really painful. I'm really sorry that, I let you down. I disappointed you. I get that this is really important. It's important for me to be here. And so let's figure out how I can show up for you in a way that's really meaningful to you. That can be so incredibly healing. And we often don't get that.
Yeah.
So let's go now to if that were a narcissist and I give you that same information, then how would a narcissist respond?
So a narcissist would probably be more likely to say, well, I told you I had to work late. I told you I had this project going on. You're not being understanding of my schedule. You are harping on me when I'm doing this to support us. You don't know the pressure that my boss puts on me. Or I'm doing this so that you can have this house to live in and you can have the car that you drive, but you want me to stop so that we're in the poorhouse? Fine, I'll quit my job. I'll leave early. And then how will you like it?
Yeah. My guess is that there would also be something about you're so needy.
Yes.
Something about, you're so needy, or, you think you're so important taking this time to cook, and you don't get that how important I am, because there's always, well, not always, but there's often something that it's just even a stab to the HSP about how, I'm being too much because I'm asking you to come home to be with me.
Yeah, you're being over dramatic, or, no one asked you to do that. You decided to do that for yourself, and now you're mad about it. So why did you even do it in the first place?
Right.
I told you I don't want you to put up all this effort for me. You're doing it anyway.
Right. Right. I can feel my energy shifting. It's just
I know.
interesting.
Oh, we should have done that in the other order. Let's go back to the non-narcissistic.
I hear you. I see you. Your feelings are important. You matter to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
The world of difference.
Yep. So if somebody finds themselves in a relationship or has just ended a relationship, well, two things. I would love to talk about gray rock. Is that a term that you use? So let's talk about what that is, first of all.
Yeah. So gray rock is a technique that I don't know who originally came up with it. There's some disagreement on who originated the term, but it's essentially making yourself as uninteresting as possible so that you don't draw the narcissist's attention. So if someone comes in and they're sort of looking for a fight, or that they're ready to go, you set them off and they're going to come with claws out, that you make yourself as bland and boring and uninteresting for them as possible so that they won't focus on you. So if they're talking, then you give the most minimal, boring answers that you can, that you keep your facial expression pretty flat and calm and unexpressive, that you keep your body language, I guess, calm, that you're not standing like in an aggressive stance with your arms crossed, and you're not cringing, you're just sort of calmly, uninterestingly blending into the wall.
Can you give some examples of what that would look like? I love tangibles.
Sure. Let's say you're going home for a holiday dinner and, your parent, your mom is starting in with how everything you do is wrong and you make the wrong decisions, and why aren't you dating this person instead of that person? Or, if you had just done this, then you would be in this place in your life by now. So they're starting in with everything you do that's not the way that they think you should. You could respond by defending yourself and saying, well, here's why I did it, and I did it for this reason, and this is my choice. Or you could just say like, yeah, and sort of non-responses that aren't challenging, aren't defensive, and aren't really agreeing. They're just non-committal sounds. So they're following along just enough without provoking further discussion.
And what happens, like in that instance, does the mother finally get tired? Like, for some reason, this isn't my area of expertise. Like, I imagine them getting angrier because they don't get a response. So what typically happens?
I mean, again, depending on what the specific blend of personality traits is, a lot of times they'll get bored. They'll go pick on someone else if you don't give them the fight that they're looking for. If they really absolutely insist on you giving an answer, then I would say in that case, it might look like something, sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue here. Then it might be something more like, well, aren't you going to respond to me? Aren't you going to say anything? Don't you have anything to say for yourself? And then your answer could be, well, I mean, we all make our choices. I live with the choices I made. And something that, again, is non-provocative as you can be. Or you might simply say like, well, I just want to focus on our Thanksgiving dinner. So would you like me to set the table? And sort of redirect it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what happens over time with the narcissist when you start doing this?
Sometimes there will be what we call an extinction burst, where whatever behavior typically would get a rise out of you, when you stop responding to it the same way, they will intensify it to try to provoke the same reaction that they're used to. So I often tell people, like, come up with your rinse and repeat phrases, your rinse and repeat responses that you don't have to think about. You can just bring them up over and over and over and over. And sooner or later, the person will realize this isn't working anymore, and they'll move on to something else. That doesn't mean they're going to stop all of the aggressive and problematic behaviors. Don't start thinking they're suddenly going to be a nicer person. But at least one thing that used to work won't work anymore, and they'll stop doing it.
Sure. Now, if somebody is in a relationship with a narcissist and they're ready to end the relationship, or the relationship has ended, and then we go through that period, I like to call it euphoric recall. We just remember all the great things and we somehow forget all the things that caused us so much pain. And then I think when we have very intense emotions, the mind just wants to make up a story about it. And so it's so easy to go down the track of the things that they heard from the narcissist. Well, maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I was too demanding. Maybe I was too needy. Maybe I'm the one that really needs help. And they kind of get stuck on that kind of neural pathway. What are some things that are helpful for people if they're just learning about it, they're trying to kind of reset and figure out like, oh, what happened and how can this not happen again? I know that's a really big question.
Yeah, let me try to break it down into a couple different little smaller segments here. One would be if you are at a point where you're starting to consider, is this a relationship that I want to stay in or not? That I would encourage you to actually start writing down some of the phrases that frequently show up when you have a discussion with your person. So if you and your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your spouse or your, whoever it is that you're dealing with, if you're having these arguments and the same things come up all the time, that you're too sensitive or you're reading into things or that's not what they said or that's not what they meant, start writing down all the things that they're saying and notice, how often do these phrases show up? Is this their go-to anytime you disagree, that it's that you're wrong and you're misinterpreting or you're misunderstanding? And when you're having that temptation to, oh, look at all the wonderful things they said and did, review, oh, but they also said and did these things that were deeply hurtful. And then showing up with a big bouquet of flowers afterward and never apologizing, they're still doing the hurtful thing and they're not really addressing the problematic behavior. Because I think it's so easy for us to get into a revisionist history where we look back at certain things and try to ignore the rest.
Does a narcissist tend to go into a poor story about how they were raised or about how inadequate whatever they experienced is, instead of directly saying, I'm really sorry, let me be better? Because I think that there's a dynamic that happens where the HSP interprets that victim story as being apologizing when it's really not.
Yes, I have seen that happen where a narcissist will say, well, my dad never showed love, or my mother never said I love you, or my parents never apologized. And they'll show up with, flowers or some sort of gift, present it as if that's an apology. But the words I'm sorry never come out. Or if they do, it's I'm sorry that happened on a day where you were already feeling sensitive. And so it's about, again, your sensitivity being the problem, not their actions being the problem. A true narcissist does not apologize.
Okay. You were going to break this down into steps. So what's the next piece you want to address?
You are going to have to remind me what the big question was, because I've already scattered part of it.
I was hoping you'd remember because I can't remember. If a person has ended a relationship and they're really struggling to create a new story about what happened or how can they get support, because it's interesting. I'm on TikTok. I love TikTok. And there are some great creators on there that are doing stuff around narcissism. And so I have some clients that I often, with their consent, send them TikToks, because I think it makes such a difference when you hear this from more than one person. And it's just so incredibly validating. So what do you suggest, short of having your therapist who spends their time on TikTok send you stuff?
I love hearing about stuff like that. I think it's amazing. I send my clients memes occasionally. They send me them too.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, I remember what I was going to say earlier when you were saying, what if I really am too sensitive, or if the person always says that. So what if you are sensitive sometimes? What if you do overreact to things sometimes? Everybody does. That's part of human nature. Like, nobody's going to be on and perfect and handle things the right way every time. But I think it's important to look at, how does your partner respond even if you make a mistake? Do they hold it over your head forever? Is that forever used to undermine anything else you say? Or is it like, okay, yeah, this time that went really far, but now I understand that really upsets you. Or, that on days where you aren't feeling well physically, that I need to be a little more thoughtful or a little more gentle in the way that I interact with you, because I know that you're already going to be keyed up. And so I can respect that your body is feeling badly, and that affects your emotional state too.
And for the HSP to know that I'm having a day where I'm feeling more sensitive or reactive or emotional, and it's my job to let my partner know,
yes,
or your kids or your parents,
Mm-hmm.
I'm having one of those days and this is what I need from you. And I know often with my kids, when I felt like I was close to losing my shirt, since I don't swear on the show, and I would let them know what I needed from them. It was often around wake up times in the morning because that was often a source of conflict. And it's interesting that my boys are 20 now and they've said how much they appreciated me letting them know that I was really kind of close to losing it and what I needed from them, that it really creates a lot of safety.
Yes.
We don't know that if we haven't been in a relationship with somebody that appreciates that. We're often told that we're being too sensitive or too picky or too demanding.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And a healthy relationship is one where you can express a need. You can say like, hey, I need some space, or I need you not to come in the room at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not ready. And they'll say, okay, I'll wait. Or how would you like me to come in when it is time to get up? Or how would you like me to respond if you tell me you're having a hard day?
Right. It's really interesting too. I recently had with a friend, I had something happen it was an ongoing thing and it was really upsetting. We used Marco Polo. And so this friend had heard kind of the ongoing saga. And so I had said something like in my last polo, like, if you want to get really upset on my behalf, I'd be okay with that. And when they poloed me, they kind of went like, no, and moved on the next thing. And I felt like, oh, that was not enough. And it was really hard. And I had to say, hey, I feel like this was a really big thing. And I really wanted more time and attention. And I had to wait the entire day for them to polo me back. And I knew, like, if they can't respond in a way that's meaningful, that I get to look at the patterns in the relationship. Is this a one-time thing? Is this an ongoing thing? And it put me, I have a lot of attachment injuries, and it really activated my attachment injuries for the day. And it made me realize how many people in my life have not been able to respond when I give them feedback. You're being too much. You're being too picky. I can't do everything that you want. And looking at current relationships where they appear to be healthy. And I think when we have shame around something, that a person can show up for us mostly. But if we hit this area where there's shame, they're not able to really hear what our injury is because of their own shame. It's just very interesting to me. So I think it's very subtle and nuanced. And I think it shows up oftentimes in more ways than we're aware of, because I'm thinking I have pretty healthy relationships these days, and to look at my reaction and to see how much does that show up. And my friend did come back and say, I'm really sorry. You're right. Thank you. And we had to talk about it. And what came up for me being, having childhood emotional neglect, it's like, it's not okay to ask for things. And I felt like it was okay. But then what came up for me afterwards, like, you don't have to reflect everything that I say all the time. Like, when I'm in a solid place, I don't need it. And when I'm going through something, I do. And you have no way of knowing what it is for that day. But I'm having this story going on about now you think that you have to respond to everything with a level 10. And I just want to be able to let you know when I'm not feeling seen and heard, and I want you to show up in the way that you want to. So even when we set limits in healthy relationships, there's often this kind of after dance that we have to do. It's really good work, but it's vulnerable work. It's courageous and brave work. And I don't think a lot of us do this in our relationships.
Right. Yes, I agree. And it is so scary to put yourself out there and say, this is what I need, especially if you've been in a lot of relationships where that hasn't been encouraged, or it hasn't been received well, or it hasn't been respected. A lot of us, because we think so deeply about other people's needs, we're so aware of like, oh, that couch cushion isn't in the right place, or, this person might want a blanket, or they think they probably want something to drink. We're so conscious of people's needs, and it can be incredibly hurtful when someone else doesn't reciprocate. And I hear this so much from my clients. They're like, well, I wouldn't do it that way, so why are they? Or I would do this, and that person's not doing it for me. And so there's this constant journey of recognizing, like, my sensitivity grants me this wonderful gift to be able to recognize people's needs, to pick up on those subtle vibes that make me ask, like, hey, do you need something to drink? Or would you like another pillow or something? And other people don't have that. That's where it's our superpower. And we need to remember not everybody has that superpower. So it does fall on us to say either like, hey, I'm having one of those days where I really need a cheerleader, or I need someone to just like, oh, I almost swore, someone to just rant with me about how, stupid this situation is. But we have to be able to verbalize it.
Yep. And I think that we often believe that everybody's wired like we are.
Mhm.
And if we know that we're an HSP and somebody else is an HSP, we often think that they're going to have the same sensitivities that we do. And while we do have many similarities, we all show up in very different ways. And
Yeah.
so that can also be another area where we've got more expectations and disappointments.
Mhm.
We just learn to work through it. But it's really important for us to do our own work and to ask for what we need and to do our part of that vulnerability and courage. It's
Yeah.
hard work and very rewarding and very satisfying when we are willing to have that depth and intimacy. And it is a scary place to go. But man, when you find someone that can do that work with you, man, is it delicious.
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's such a balancing act. And I think HSPs are actually better equipped to do this balancing act than most people because we do have those subtle awarenesses. But that finding that sweet spot between making excuses for someone who's not trying and having overly high expectations that other people will react the way we do, like finding that middle ground where you can say, like, okay, I do need to verbalize my needs. And then I need to pay attention to whether or not this person is at least making an effort.
Right.
They may not get it right every time, but if they're at least putting a good faith effort in and they're trying and they're owning it if they mess up, that tells you you're on the right track with a good relationship.
Absolutely. We're needing to wrap up, and I feel like there's so much more to talk about. Why don't you tell us about your book? And my guess is that that's probably a good resource for someone that's struggling in a relationship. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what it is and how it would be helpful for people?
Sure. So I wrote the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook with adult children of narcissists in mind because, that's my clients, those are my people. And I also wrote it with HSPs in mind because, again, I see so much crossover in the clients who come to me that come from those backgrounds and that have that trait. So the book it's broken up into 3 sections. There's an introduction section that talks about what is gaslighting, and the historical roots of the term and what it looks like when it shows up. So phrases that are often used, learning to spot it in various kinds of conversations. And then it moves into more about how to recognize it in your own life and how to begin healing from it. And one of the most important pieces of that healing journey is self-compassion. So there's a good chunk of the book that is devoted to helping you tap into your self-compassion, understanding what may stop you from finding that grace for yourself, and helping you tap into it so that you can move into the actual healing work.
Yeah, there's so much self-blame that goes on that people feel like I should have known better. I should have caught it. I should have, shoulda. And there's no
Mm-hmm.
way that if somebody else told that person a parallel story, that the person who's blaming themselves would have that amount of judgment and blame for somebody
Right.
else.
Right. Yeah, we're hard on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that sense that we should know better and it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do actually speak to that pretty specifically, that self-blame and the revisionist history of looking back and saying, oh, but all these signs, why didn't I pick up on it? What's wrong with me? And you know what? Nobody gets it right all the time. We all miss things. So, there's a good bit in here about forgiving yourself for the things you didn't catch and putting responsibility where it belongs. Yeah, you might have missed things. And the other person also chose to behave in toxic and unhealthy ways.
Right. Did you say the name of your book?
Yes, it is the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook, Healing from Emotional Abuse.
Okay. And it's in the show notes. And if people are interested in getting your workbook, where can they find it?
They can find it on Amazon or on bookshop.org. You can also order it through Target or Barnes & Noble.
Are there any groups for people? I guess it's so hard when I see people that are hurting and they just feel like they're the only one. I always want to connect them with other people. So are there groups for people that are recovering from these types of relationships, whether it's parents or employers or personal relationships?
There are several great websites. I also run groups for adult children of narcissists. My group is called Walking on Eggshells, and you can see more about that on my website.
Why don't you tell us what that is?
Walking on Eggshells is a group for adults who've experienced narcissistic abuse or emotionally immature parents. It's a 6-week group where in small, like 4 to 5 person groups, we talk about what it's like to grow up in these environments, how it affects you, some of the signs and symptoms that show up, and how to begin healing from the pain that was inflicted by setting boundaries and by allowing yourself to begin healing. And it's wonderful for the clients who do these groups because they get to talk to other people who can get it, who can really relate to their experiences, and so that they know they're not alone. The isolation is such a hard piece of this.
Yeah. What's the website?
It's www.amymarlow-macoy.com.
Okay. And if you go to the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com, go to the podcast page and then find this episode with Amy, you can click on that and the show notes are there. If you're listening on a podcast player, if it lists the show notes, I always put all of the links in the show notes. Yeah. Any other suggestions that you have before we wrap it up, Amy?
Yeah, there are some great books out there. There are some great websites that I would highly recommend. I know you've already interviewed Lindsay Gibson, but I love her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. I refer my clients to that all the time. There's a great website called outofthefog.website that has lots of wonderful blog articles about escaping from the fear, obligation, and guilt of narcissistic relationships. There's another awesome website called www.narcissistabusesupport.com. It's Tracy Malone's website where she has tons of articles and some coaching groups. And I also highly recommend the book, Will I Ever Be Good Enough by Carol McBride.
Is there anything else before we go? I think we may need to do another episode. And Dr. Lindsay Gibson is going to be doing a second interview because everybody seemed to really love hearing her. So keep your eyes out for that interview.
Definitely.
Anything else before we end up? End up what? Done?
End up even more brain fogged. Just a reminder and an encouragement to any HSP that's listening that has been in these relationships that it can feel absolutely hopeless when you're in the midst of it. And I just want to remind you that it's not hopeless and that healing is absolutely possible and that you have inside of you everything you need to heal. Your sensitivity is a gift and a superpower. And even if other people can't appreciate it, it's an amazing thing.
And my guess is that doing your workbook will also help to identify what those gaslighting statements are, because I know the fear is like, how am I not going to do this again? And I think once we do our own healing and we recognize those statements, that then like we hear them and we're like, what?
Yes. You'll recognize the statements. You'll understand where they come from and how they're used. You'll understand how you respond to them so that you can alter those responses. And you'll also learn what healthy relationships look like so that you can say, I'm going to look for these traits and aim toward those and aim away from these unhealthy ones.
Do you have any resources? I always talk with people and it's like, we talk about identifying values of what you want to look for in a partner. Do you have any good resources on where people can find that?
In terms of specific like websites or books, let me hold on a second. I'm going to flip through my book again because I know I have something in here about looking for examples of healthy relationships. In the book, there is a section where we talk a lot about boundaries and healthy relationships. And I think there's some good, helpful information for helping people figure out their own preferences. I do have a section in here about relationship role models. And I would actually encourage you, when you're thinking about relationships, to look back at what are the blueprints for your own relationships. So you might have had an unhealthy immediate family, but was there anyone in your life that you looked at and you were like, that person is who I want to be like? Like, did you have a grandmother? Was there a neighbor? Was there a family friend, a teacher? Was there somebody that you had a better connection with? Someone that you could look at and say, I think I want my relationships to be more like that. Look at the traits that stand out to you about those relationships. Was there honesty? Was there authenticity? Was there care about other people's feelings? Was there compassion? Look for the things that make you feel cared for in a relationship.
I also ask people to list what the deal breakers are so that you know that when you hit, because it's so easy in a relationship that you're attracted to some things or the charisma or the newness, and then you kind of miss what these red flags are for the deal breakers. Yeah.
I think it's very important to know your must-haves and can't stands.
Yeah. Amy, this has been great. I think we may end up needing to do this again because there's so much that we didn't even get to touch on, but maybe we'll just do that then.
I would love to. I can talk about this stuff for a very long time. So No problem there.
Thank you so much for being here today, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
All right. Bye-bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know what you thought of the episode. I can't tell you how many people, especially in the closed Facebook group that we have, and clients, have had relationships or are having relationships with people that have narcissistic tendencies or are narcissists, whether it's parents or employers or personal relationships. These relationships can cause so much pain and damage and so much self-blame because of the gaslighting. If you find that you relate to this and you haven't had a chance to start your healing process, I really encourage you to do this. We have so many gifts and wonderful traits as HSPs that it's just so easy to have our self-esteem undermined by being in a relationship with someone who doesn't value us and really has no empathy. I really encourage you to do whatever it takes. Follow up on the resources that Amy provided. There's just lots of great stuff. If you're interested in the episode with Dr. Lindsay Gibson, it's episode 80. It's the best of the podcast. And like I said, I will be interviewing Dr. Gibson. So hang tight and keep your eye out for that episode. We will be doing a follow-up episode. I just think that it's really up to us to do our healing. And I really do believe that even if you have had these types of damaging, toxic relationships, you can heal, you can recover, you can learn to spot what is dangerous, the red flags. You can create relationships that are happy, satisfying, and fulfilling. The great thing about HSPs is differential susceptibility. You put us in a positive relationship and we do really well. You put us in a poor relationship and we fare worse than the non-HSPs. And we want to learn, we want to grow, and we have that capacity to take in that information. 50% of clients in therapy are HSPs, and our HS clients have better outcomes in therapy and coaching than our non-HS clients. I see it. I see my clients making astounding changes because we want to grow and learn. Because of our deep processing, we're just kind of always working on stuff. If you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling like you can't do it, please let me hold the vision for you that you can change. There is hope. With healing, you really can have satisfying relationships. If this episode was something that was helpful, please consider sharing it with anybody that you think it would help. Consider sharing the podcast with someone. If you haven't subscribed, please check the subscribe button on your podcast player. It really helps. If you have any questions, you want to get in touch with me, any ideas for shows, things that we missed, feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com, or you can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. As our world is still a little upside down, it'll probably be a couple weeks from today when you listen to this, maybe about a month out. I think things are still going to be a little bit crazy. If you're in the States, we have our presidential election coming up. We'll just see how that goes. My hope is that you're finding some peace, some joy. These are really hard times right now. If you're struggling in how you're functioning, problems with sleep, exercise, conflict, relationships, I may be repeating myself. It's really normal. If you're not managing and you need support, please reach out to a therapist, a coach, anybody that can give you some support. I think that we need as much support as we can. And before Amy and I started recording today, both of us were talking about how we're impaired with COVID. I don't know that I don't know. I don't want to make an assumption. I can just tell you that a number of us HSPs are being impacted by COVID. And I can see in some areas I'm functioning really well. In other areas, you think that a teenager was left on their own to eat their own food. It's just crazy. And I'm doing the best that I can do and having as much self-compassion as I can. We've never lived through something like this. And I think what feels tricky is it's not like there are bombs going off in the street. We have electricity. We have food. Some of us have jobs. Many people do not. Many people are struggling financially. But the appearance for some of us is that things remain the same. For others, there are new stresses with COVID and health issues, financial issues, housing issues, employment issues. All of those things are really, really tough. And we've never experienced something like this for this amount of time without really having a clear plan in sight with the pandemic. I just want to validate that this is a really challenging time. We can do it. We can do hard things. It doesn't mean that our lives have to be miserable. And if we're feeling the effects, we're feeling the effects. And even during the interview, you can tell I lost my train of thought. Amy forgot what she was going to talk about. This is just what happens when we endure stress for a really long amount of time, even if it appears that not much has changed in our lives. So I just want to validate that for you. Spend some time outdoors, spend some time with pets, put your feet in the grass or the ground if you can, if you're barefoot, spend some time in nature. I think I said that. See, I'm forgetful and repetitive. You can connect with people that care about you. If you're able to get a hug, that's great. If not, give yourself a hug. I just hope you're all doing well, and I'm thinking about you and sending you lots of love and compassion. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.